Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's InvestOps webinar, Why You Can't Outsource Your Data Problems. My name is Adam Skinner, and I'll be moderating today's session. And I'm thrilled to be joined by an excellent and incredibly knowledgeable panel today. So we have Neil Vernon, Chief Product Officer at Gresham, Jen Mackin, who is Global Director of Data and Managed Services at Gresham Tech, and Nicholas Pageant, who is Head of Operations at Pazina Investment Management. Now, today's discussion is built around a striking finding from the recent InvestOps report that we produced with Gresham. So, this report found that 72% of firms say they would consider outsourcing their data acquisition or data management. Now, this sounds practical, but it becomes provocative the moment you dig a little deeper into the findings. As the report and today's speakers will make clear, data is not something you can hand off and expect someone else to fix. As Neil put it so perfectly, you can outsource your plumbing, but not your bloodstream. So today we're going to examine why the outsourcing mindset has limits, where firms risk losing context, control, and governance, why true ownership can't be delegated, and how hybrid models allow firms to scale without surrendering stewardship of their most critical asset. We'll also look at how managed services and partnerships, like those offered by Gresham, can accelerate modernization while keeping firms firmly in control of their data. Now, as I mentioned earlier, our panel bring deep product expertise, client-side insight, and real-world operational experience to this topic. So with that, I think it's enough from me. I'd like to dive right in with some questions for our panel, and we're going to start with a little bit of a reality check. So Jen, I'm going to come to you first for this one, if you don't mind. As we've already mentioned, this recent report reveals 72% of firms would consider outsourcing their data acquisition or management. So from your viewpoint, why do you think this number is so high? And what are firms actually hoping to solve by outsourcing, in your opinion?
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I'm actually not too terribly surprised that the number is as high as 72%. I think what we're hearing in our engagements with clients and prospects kind of really supports that. So data's quietly, or maybe not so quietly, I think, become one of the most complex parts of the business for our clients. Firms are dealing with an explosion of sources, formats, regulatory expectations, but at the same time being asked to do more with leaner teams. So outsourcing isn't really about giving up something, but it's more about gaining some control. And I think that firms are hoping to solve a couple of different things around this area. So first is resiliency around their data. So key data processes often are dependent on a small handful of people, institutional knowledge, manual workarounds built over time. And I think outsourcing can help de-risk some of that. Um, Second is scaling and speed. So new accounts, custodians, data sources, new asset classes, maybe that are new to them as an organization. I think internal teams tend to struggle with not becoming a bottleneck in these areas. And so firms want a model that can scale consistently without having to continue to hire or retrain their employees. And then I think last, which is a lot more what we're hearing when talking with clients and prospects, is some focus. So they don't want their best people spending time chasing files, troubleshooting breaks, managing vendor handoffs. They want them to stay focused on kind of oversight and value add work. So when you look at that 72%, I think it's less about cost takeout and more about operational maturity. So firms are realizing that how they acquire and manage data directly impacts everything downstream.
Okay, there, that's what wonderful. Neil and Nick, do you have anything else that you would like to add on that as well?
I would just say I would have thought the number might be a little bit higher because I would think everybody should really be considering it. As the head of an operational team, cost is a big thing, and so you have to think about what is best for the firm. And Jen kind of touched on it, but cost is a big thing. I think people want to achieve outsourcing headaches or outsourcing sort of low-level work, but you got to be careful when you do that because you don't want to um, end up taking on additional risk from a reputational point of view. So I'm on the risk committee at our firm, and one of the biggest risks that we see outside of investment risk, obviously, is our reputational risk. If we get something wrong with our data, um, it ends up coming back to us. And so we haven't fully outsourced a lot, but we have started doing some of the hybrid type uh, setup.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'd agree with that, Nick. I worry when we engage with prospects and customers that we very often hit the person that can only say no. Outsourcing's got a bad rap. It should be higher than 72. But you meet these people that think that outsourcing is riskier. They think they're going to lose control. They think that when things go wrong, they won't have anybody to shout at, and none of those things are really true. You can manage all of those things, and so we need to get past the person that can only say no and push that number much higher. It can go to the high 90s. It should go to the high 90s.
okay, yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks so much to all three of you. It leads me on quite nicely to my next question, I think, as well. And Nick, I'm going to come to you first on this one, if you don't mind. This is on outsourcing the ownership. So there is a big difference, right, between outsourcing data acquisition and outsourcing data ownership. So where do firms draw that line well, and where do they get it wrong? Could you also, if possible, tell us about some of the governance or oversight gaps that tend to appear as well?
Yeah, I'll just speak to our firm. We, probably 10 years plus have been working on our data maturity, data governance, and a data team. And so we take that ownership really seriously, and outsourcing ownership almost doesn't seem really possible to me. The acquisition of data, I can see a need there, but again, the reputational risk of not having full understanding of our ownership of the data, which is our investment performance, the index performance, all that stuff that is presented to clients is really paramount. So about 10 years ago, we did start to build an internal team of data analysts, data stewards, and thank God we did. I don't know where we would be with the evolution of our client needs without that team, who sort of not only deal with the day-to-day ingestion and collection of data, but sort of know where it all ends up in our ecosystem. And so, again, they came in, created governance, but also, sorry, the light went out here. um, the governance, but also figured out our ecosystem, mapped it out so that we could manage that data better.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. Jen or Neil, is there anything else what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think Nick brings up a good point, right? I think there needs to be a clear distinction in, what you're outsourcing versus your accountability. And so I think that, firms, when, they could do a good job and they're outsourcing the execution of things like acquisition, feed setups, onboarding of accounts at the sources, or some normalization of the data so that things come in standardized formats and everything kind of looks and feels the same. But I think the distinction is, the ownership of the data, who's ultimately responsible for understanding the data, how the data gets used, where it needs to flow downstream into their internal systems and processes. Because to Nick's point, right, there is a risk there, right? So internally, clients, they need to understand that data, right? They need to understand how that data gets used.
Yeah, absolutely. Neil, do you have anything to add on that point?
I think I'm fine on this for now, Adam. Thank you.
Okay, great stuff. Well, I think one of the important things that we to remember with all of this is also the human element. And Neil, I was really keen to get your thoughts on this one. In your experience, is the outsourcing issue really a technology problem, or is the challenge more to do with people and expertise?
So Adam, I'm a technologist, really. I was a programmer many years ago, and I've been a technologist all my life. So I'm going to, of course, tell you it's a technology problem. We can solve all of this with technology. We don't need the humans in the mix at all. And you would know, and you would see straight through me if I said that, because in reality, there's a lot of nuance in this business, and silly things. When you're talking to a custodian, do you require 3 copies of this form or 4 copies of this form? When you're onboarding a new account, do you go through 6 steps or 7 steps or 8 steps or 9 steps? Do you have to have this ready or not? Is this custodian going to work well over a bank holiday weekend and a public holiday, or are they going to fail over a public holiday? And you've got to be ready for that. That information you can store in technology systems, but ultimately, I think it's people that gather that information, that have it locked in their heads. And I talked about the person that can only say no and lowering the amount of outsourcing that goes on. I do see a fear that when you outsource, that suddenly all of that information that you've built up over many years, you're going to lose in your business, and you're going to hope, wing and a prayer, that your outsourcer has that knowledge. Now, in reality, they almost certainly do, and they will have a team of people that can replace your team and will have that knowledge. And ultimately, and I know we're going to talk more about AI and the fact that we're going to get more and more need for data. It's far more likely that your outsourcer will have people that have that knowledge. And so I don't see although the people will logically move from you to your outsourcer will, if they're good, will have that knowledge, will have those people, will have that expertise. And I think they're going to be far better placed than you are ultimately, given the big growth in the data that you're going to need in the coming weeks, months, and years as AI starts to really take over and demand more and more data.
Absolutely. How does everybody else feel about that? Does anybody agree, disagree with that?
I'd say, I'm not sure. I don't think of it as a people problem just from internally at our firm. Like I said, we built out a pretty big team. We've got a chief digital officer, a chief data officer, really impressive people who understand the sort of industry and ecosystem. And sort of like Neil said, the technology can do the problem solving. What I think maybe there is sort of a lack of creativity, where I feel like the entire industry's ecosystem could evolve, where I don't end up being a middleman in terms of data, where data could get pushed out to central hubs, and I don't have to collect it, smooth it, push it internally to 5 different systems. So, Snowflake type architecture might be the start of that, but it feels to me like we could solve a lot of the problems with a little more creativity, because the people profession actually is grown a lot in 10 years, right? There's education, there's full sort of professional certificates for data. And obviously technology is moving quickly. But I think maybe a rethink of how we collect and use data as an industry might be quite helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Neil, obviously you mentioned AI earlier, and I do want to kind of turn the conversation there now, if you don't mind. So I'd like to talk a little bit about AI readiness and outsourcing. So Neil, I know this is this is right up your street, and with AI becoming more and more prominent, how does outsourcing impact a firm's ability to adopt or operationalize AI effectively?
Yeah, so I'd like to talk about it from 2 angles, really. First is the actual process of acquiring the data, publishing that data, and getting that data through your organization. And I think there, as a company, Gresham, we're investing in AI in Jen's group and enabling Jen's group to be more efficient and more effective through AI. So the actual the data problem itself is definitely made better, made lower cost through AI, and we've seen some exciting things happening there and some real successes. Actually, rare successes, I think you'll find in the application of AI, some real success in Jen's group there. But secondly, I'd like to talk more about the actual use of AI in your downstream and upstream processes. So I'm doing a project now with a couple of hedge funds, and we need more data. we need for the AI to be successful. I need a feed of LEIs. I need a feed of corporate actions. I need a feed of new issues. And it's remarkably difficult to get hold of that data. I'm sure Nick's got something to say on this, but my experience with those hedge funds, at least, is when you start to ask around, how do I get a feed of corporate actions in your organization? What do you do? And you're left with people scratching their heads. So I can see that some like our own AI projects could indeed flounder because of this lack of data. I'd also point out that the data itself at the moment doesn't carry much lineage with it, doesn't carry much meta information. And so when you start to consume that data in other projects, not just AI projects, but I think AI may be particularly vulnerable to this, is you don't know where that data is coming from. You don't know about the quality of that data. You don't know the timeliness of that data. You don't know whether you're authorized to use that data for this particular use case. So I think we've got a lot more work to do in carrying metadata into our organizations so that the AI and other projects can safely consume that data.
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting. Thank you, Neil. Did anybody else have anything to add on that as well?
I would just say one other issue with getting data is the cost of it. One of the biggest costs that we face as a firm is that collection of data from the multiple vendors. So that again, the rethink of the ecosystem in my mind could also bring costs down, which could help us to get the necessary data for our business.
I think too, just kind of the volume of types of data that you need, right? I mean, Nick, you brought up earlier kind of all the client-facing stuff, right? You've got indexes, you've got performance, you've got your trade execution data that you need for reconciliation, right? I think there's so many different kind of avenues of types of data too that I think kind of increase the complexity in how you kind of grab everything, bring it in, normalize it, standardize it, store it, and then figure out how to use it and run different kind of AI or machine learning on top of it.
Yeah, and I'd also say just sort of a little bit counterintuitively, the use cases for AI currently at our firm are kind of in the front office, so research and marketing and not operational. We think there's some really good use cases for writing client commentaries or synthesizing our research from external, internal systems and being able to search there. It might be, a greater ROI than sort of automating one more, operational process.
Does it have to be a choice, Nick? Can't you do both?
Well, there's time constraints, right? And resource constraints, which I come up against. But yes, obviously.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you. So, Nick, I would love to hear from you as we move on to manual process and context loss. So, many firms still run manual steps, even in automated workflows. So, how does outsourcing impact the visibility needed to fix or modernize these processes?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Neil's point, I'd love to automate a lot more, but there's sort of a cost to putting my technology team on certain projects, so we can't automate everything. And then, for a relatively small firm, we have under 200 people. Context loss is a really serious concern. So if you were to outsource stuff, processes, and a vendor changes or a process breaks overnight, you need somebody in-house who remembers where to go. And so that's definitely a big issue for us. The context loss also is we're a 30-year-old firm, and a lot of us, including myself, have been here 20 years, so we know where the bodies are buried, so to speak. So us leaving, just the people leaving, that's not a great answer necessarily, but it is the reality, right? So I'd love to kill all manual processes, but that's not really practical, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else to add, Jen or Neil? No.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think, and Neil might have mentioned this earlier, right? There's a bit of a fear around outsourcing, that it creates a bit of a black box and some uncertainty and maybe potentially more unknowns. But I think in practice, if it's done well and it's a partnership, I think the opposite is true. That you know, you'll get more kind of visibility into the processes because they'll be better documented. There'll be metrics, there'll be reporting requirements, there'll be a partnership and communication between the two organizations to understand workflows, get it documented, put up backup procedures in place around things should things not work or fall apart or whatever the situation is that comes up. It's you just never know. I think every day is always an interesting little brush fire somewhere around something operationally. And so I think if you have a good partnership with that outsource vendor, then it's kind of a shared responsibility and understanding, well, here's how it works and, best in class, and then here's the backup procedures should something not work, and how does your organization kind of pivot and handle that?
Yeah, absolutely. Neil, before I move on, is there anything that you'd like to add on that point?
Yeah, and I think to Nick's point a little bit about the proliferate or the continued existence of manual processes. I think we are remarkably poor actually at gathering data within our own organizations and figuring out where time is spent and what those activities are. Figuring out, in the data world, which custodians work well, which ones don't, which ones are going to be late, which ones are not, which ones send you yesterday's file rather than today's file. We're very poor at collating and gathering all that data, and typically, those kinds of problems are the things that give rise to many of the manual processes. So I'd encourage people listening to really gather that data, and if you have outsourced, make sure your outsourcer is gathering that data on your behalf, so that you know which of your partners are working well, which of your partners are not working well, which partners are generating the manual effort, which partners are providing all the data in such a way that most things are passed through and automated. So gather more data on your processes is I'd encourage.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks. That also leads us very nicely on to what I want to talk about next. And that's about some specific examples. So Jen, I'll come to you first on this one. What would be great is if each of you could share an example of a firm that has struck the right balance between external support and internal expertise, and specifically what, in your opinion, made that successful?
Um, yeah, so you know, we work with a lot of different types of clients. So we've got hedge funds, asset managers. We work with a number of fintech vendors where we help to support and kind of supplement parts of their workflows and processes. And one firm kind of comes to top of mind, where they outsource their kind of mechanics around their data, but not their knowledge and data intelligence. And so they've outsourced all of their acquisition and normalization to Gresham to gain scale and resiliency. They've got hundreds of feeds that they're collecting every day, tens of thousands of accounts. So, ongoing kind of change management, exception processing, review analysis. But internally, they've retained very clear data ownership, data stewards, defined data quality thresholds, and just really kind of deep understanding of how their data flows through their organization. I think what's made it successful was that from the very onset, it was very much a partnership. So they treat us like almost an extension of their team versus kind of an outsourced provider. And so very clear documented rules around their data, for normalization, the data requirements, and it's very transparent. Um, Exceptions are reviewed together often, to understand where things are changing, whether it's their internal rules and configurations and requirements or things are changing at the sources. So there's a lot of communication and transparency between the teams. I think it resulted in faster onboarding. I think fewer operational kind of surprises around the data when we started to deliver onward their normalized files. But I think what it really created was confidence on their side that the data they're getting is the data that they require and need every day for their downstream processes. And so there's a lot of confidence that's been built between the teams.
Okay, I mean, what a great example. Thank you, Jen. So Nick, Neil, the floor is yours as well. It'd be great to hear an example that you might be able to give as well.
I would say my example, unfortunately, similar to Jen, is our evolution in terms of operational reconciliation, bank to manager data, where we started out essentially outsourcing the data acquisition and have slowly over the years moved to outsourcing the data normalization and then finally moving to sort of a hybrid managed service process. And that's sort of dipping your toe in, then your full foot, and not fully outsourced, but more that hybrid model that makes us still feel comfortable that we own the data and um, have a responsibility to the data, but also have a partner on the other side who is doing a lion's share of the work.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nick. Neil?
Well, my example isn't similar to Jen's at all. It is Jen, and it's that knowledge that everybody's hearing today on this conversation, and also true of Nick too. But what makes our business successful is the depth of knowledge that Jen has. It's a depth of knowledge that Jen's team have. And I'm not saying this is an out and out, digression. It's the reality of being successful in this business is expertise. You need people with deep expertise. To Nick's point, 20 years of experience, that's hard earned. And actually, there's a huge amount of value with that. And so, that's what makes successful projects, is people that live and breathe this stuff, that they do it day in, day out, and they understand it really, really well. They understand all the nuances. They just get it. And if you don't have those people, well, if you don't have those people, you absolutely need to outsource. You should outsource. You retain those people, please.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so really great examples. Thank you ever so much to all three of you. Yeah, I'm sure that they will undoubtedly resonate with the people watching. So before we sign off, I've got one final question for you all, and that question is: if you could give one recommendation to firms looking to modernize without losing ownership of their data, what would that recommendation be? Who'd like to go first?
I'll just say, as fast as technology is moving, I think it's still investing in people at your firm, upskilling. We've spent a lot of time doing that to make sure that we're ready to handle the technology that comes. So building out people who understand the data, maybe hiring people like Jen, for example, is going to be important for success.
Um, yeah, I would say, think about the headaches, outsource the headaches, data acquisition. We do it all day, every day, and it's a headache. It's a headache for us. The number of feeds and formats and different ways that data sources want to send data or not want to send data. Those are things that, you can more easily outsource and free up a lot of the pain points and time for the teams. So, while still keeping some of that knowledge in-house.
Thanks, Jen.
We began this discussion by talking about that 72% number, 72% of firms outsourcing, and I think unanimously agreeing that it should be higher. And my view, as I said at that time, was it's not higher because there are too many people that can only say no. So my one piece of advice would be, don't be that person that only says no. Say yes and embrace outsourcing.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I think that that brings us to an end for today's session. As we promised, is full of insights. And what we will do for anybody watching is we'll follow up with a link to the report that kind of underpinned today's discussion, so you can explore those findings in more detail. I'd like to say a huge thank you to everybody on the panel for joining me today. So yeah, thank you, Neil, Jen, Nick. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you all. I said we'll follow up with everybody, and a massive thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. And
Thank you.
enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.